Am I on the right page? How to meditate on the 12 links? That's the one that's up. Yeah.
So I'm just saying hello to people out there in online. So welcome to Discovering Buddhism, Samsara, Nirvana. Alan here. So this is our. Sorry, we're a bit late. Busy here at the moment. So welcome, and we'll. This is our last class, and next week on this topic, Samsara and Nirvana, and next week we start on new topic, compassion. Or bodhicitta, I think it's just called bodhicitta. Okay, so hopefully you've got your notes for today, and I also sent the question and answers. Normally I don't get the answers, but because a lot of people are at home, or some, I'm doing it that way. Probably next topic, I think I might send all the questions on the third week. So anyone who wants to have a go at answering them without answers, then they can perhaps send them during the week, and I can have a quick look at them, and then I'll give you the answers next week. So at least you've had a chance to try on your own to answer some of the question. And I mean, there's no perfect answer, so some of the answers can be variable. Okay, so let's start by doing our 5 minutes breath meditation, just to calm down. I think we need the door open, don't we? Yes, it's a bit hot. Okay, so get comfortable, sitting, lying on the floor, on a chair, and we just come into our inner world, into our body and mind. What's happening? Spending a few minutes checking how we feel. Just calming the mind. A few seconds to appreciate our great opportunity to sit together, do some practice, study the Dharma. And now just coming into the body, just checking we're comfortable. The back ribs be straight, just the shoulders relaxed. Feel the weight of the body on the floor or the chair. You can use the out breath to just relax and let go physically. And let go mentally. The busyness of the day, time to let go. And coming into the breath, just observing the breath. Just watching, not controlling, not to change, just observing the breath. Gentle rhythm of the breath. That's the object. Just checking now and again, are we still on the breath, using our introspection, watching what the mind's doing. If we've lost the object, the breath, just let go of that distraction. Notice it, gently let go, just a thought, and come back to the breath. Okay, so just to recap what we've done. So Samsara and Nirvana, basically we've covered, it's really basically the Four Noble Truths, this topic, Four Noble Truths. And the first week we looked at what they are, and in particular the first one. Does anyone remember what they are? At least, what's the first one? Anyone remember?
Suffering.
What was it?
Is this the Four Noble Truths?
Yeah, Four Noble Truths. The first one?
Oh, existence is suffering.
Suffering, okay. The truth of suffering, true suffering, I think they call it. So that's the three types. Anyone remember what the three types are? Three types of suffering. we have a coughing fit. Suffering of suffering. So that's the obvious one we all have familiar experience with. Suffering, that's the one: getting sick, aging, aches and pains, dying, and also mental problems, depression, anxiety. So all the things that just having a human body involved, that's called suffering of suffering. So that doesn't take very much to acknowledge that exists. Second type, which is much more subtle. Anyone remember? It's called suffering of change. That's the one that actually we usually treat as pleasure. The sensory pleasures, nice food, nice music, the having a good place to live, good clothes, things that we all want, which of course we need these basics, but grasping and holding on to them, wanting more money, more than we need, this idea of wanting these, what they call samsaric pleasures. They say it's like drinking salt water, it actually can't satisfy us completely. And that causes that type of suffering, the suffering of dissatisfaction. And then the last one, suffering, all pervasive is the way they usually describe it. So that's actually the suffering of being in samsara, cyclic existence. So that's actually what we've been looking at, that suffering, being subject to old age, sickness and death and rebirth, this cycle of being caught up in this, what they call cyclic existence. So that's basically what we've been looking at for the last 2 weeks. Second Noble Truth, causes, true causes. So all these three types of suffering has a cause. Basically, it's all in the mind. The causes are actually in our mind. And we had a look at the affliction. They can be summed up quite neatly as mental afflictions, sometimes called delusions. I usually call them disturbing thoughts. Delusions, afflictions, hallucinations, and also karma. Karma is the effect of acting under all these delusions and affliction. That's going to cause us to have negative results later if we're acting under the influence of these afflictions. So that's the idea of everything we do in our body, speech, and mind. So seeds on the mind stream, the continuum, and they come to fruition, not necessarily in this life, but in future lives, different times, future life. So they're the causes. Greed, hatred, and ignorance are the big ones, both six and affliction. And because we've been acting under the influence of these, because they're what we've been acting of since time, beginningless time, because there's no beginning to our rebirths. Mind is without beginning. So they're there very strongly, but because they're dependent on causes and conditions, they have caused, this is the second note of truth, if we tackle the causes, purify, and start changing our minds, our mental habits, then we can end the causes and therefore end the suffering. So that's the third noble truth. True cessations, they call that, true cessation. So true cessations, and so to help us understand how we can end this cyclic existence, what we call, that is the definition of samsara, being subject to uncontrolled rebirths. So we looked at the 12 links last week, the Wheel of Life, and by helping, we didn't actually finish it, so we'll finish that off tonight. And then we'll look at the fourth noble truth, true paths. But so we actually, in the fourth noble truth actually covers the whole of the Dharma, really, the true path. So we won't be able to, we just sort of touch on it in this coverage, in this DB course. And basically everything we do from now on is looking at the paths. It includes compassion, wisdom, renunciation. Renunciation, bodhicitta, shunyata, another way of describing it. They're three principles of the path. Okay, so the other thing I've got listed there on the notes is review the questions and answers for the subject from last week. So most of them, I think, or some of them we've already covered. And when I gave the questions, and we did the first three sessions, I took them from these notes. So we've done anyway. So the first one is looking at what is renunciation, what is liberation, what is existence, what is psychic existence. So quite good answers there. Liberation is actually Nirvana, and psychic existence is Samsara. And renunciation is what we want to generate to become liberated, to get out of samsara and become enlightened or enter nirvana. So all these contemplations on suffering, true causes, true cessations, is to help us develop the wish to become liberated. So that's basically renunciation, the wish to get out. If we don't know we're sick, we don't go to the doctor, and we can actually get sicker and sicker and eventually die. So that's why suffering is taught first, to actually make us realise that it's not just the aches and pains and the sickness and so on that we have as a problem. It's also the second type of suffering, the third type of suffering, the very idea of where we are, where our situation, our lot, needs to be changed, so that we don't just get thrown into the next rebirth, because the next rebirth may not necessarily be nice and comfortable, the one we've got now in the human body. So, so the one thing, by looking at the Wheel of Life, the 12 links, we do get a good idea of the possibilities of other rebirth, and we also get a good idea. This is probably the main idea, the main link, which is the main purpose, is to appreciate the idea of causality, how things arise dependent on causes and conditions, which is the theme that runs through this whole topic. Causes and conditions. Things don't exist or don't arise spontaneously; they have causes and conditions. So that the 12 links show that each link causes the next one. So there's this step, 12-step process. So each link depends on the previous one, and it also actually shows us that if we can stop that chain, those links, stop that cycle, we can actually get out of the cyclic existence. So, just going, did anyone manage to have a look at, is there anything that's come up so far, either what we did last week or in the past few weeks, or maybe if you had time to look at the questions and answers, anything that you want me to cover? One thing I'm going to do is go through the actual Wheel of Life in a bit more detail, because I've got a very good guided meditation for the end of the class on the Wheel of Life. I've actually changed what the meditation is on the notes, because the actual meditation I've got listed there didn't work for me when I tried it today. It's meditation on how the 12 links work. So better than that is just meditation in the 12 links. It's much more simple. Okay, so truth of suffering, truth of orange. I'm just looking at the questions and answers. Yep. I don't think there's anything in particular there you need to look at. So just looking at these, page 1 of the notes, these sort of how the 12 links works, the meditation on the 12 links. Yangtze Rinpoche, that's the book that some of you have got there, Practicing the Path. He points out that, first of all, the whole idea of what studying the 12 links is to see how cause and effect works, and how we can relate it to our own situation. So just looking a bit more detail, those links of ignorance, craving and grasping. Ignorance, craving and grasping, if you've got your little chart there, remember ignorance is the first link, which is the blind woman with a walking stick. Craving is the potter making a pot. And grasping is the monkey in the tree. Yeah. So those are the links that they represent the afflictions. Remember, I said that earlier on that the two main causes of our suffering are karma and delusions. So delusions being afflictions, the three big ones are ignorance, craving and grasping. So the links of karmic formations and renewed existence is called there, which is rebirth. These there, which is rebirth. These the actions and their effects, which is karma. And then the last one of the other links. So these karmic formations, the last one of the other links. So these karmic formations are actions under the influence of delusion, of actions under the influence of delusion, and being thrown into the next rebirth are karma, and the other links are the results of delusions and karma. So, just because we're going to come back to this in the meditation at the end, all I did was just look at the 12 links last week and didn't look in detail at the others. I wasn't quite sure what those three were in the middle, so I sorted that all out. So let's start at the very centre, Wheel of Life, the pig, the peacock, or the peacock and the snake. So these are the root afflictions. So the pig, anyone remember what that represents? The pig? Ignorance, yeah. The peacock, or the rooster, they call it a rooster here. That's attachment. And pig is, the snake is aversion. Greed, hatred and attachment, or greed, attachment and aversion is all different. Ignorance, attachment and aversion. Ignorance, attachment and aversion. So that's sort of like the core. The fundamental ignorance represented by the pig is the misconception of the holding on to the mistaken idea of how things exist. Okay, and believing that all phenomena exist from their own side inherently. So that includes what's out there, and also this me here, thinking that they're actually existing from their own side, not from cause and condition, but they actually have some sort of self-existence. So that's the basis of all our mistaken actions, thinking that that's true. So that's why they put it right in the middle there. Then around that, you see the ring. So that ring are contaminated actions. So you see there's a lighter side and a darker side. The lighter side are positive actions. Interestingly, they call positive actions, even if we're not enlightened being, positive actions are still called contaminated, because they're still, until we become enlightened, we're still under this idea that things exist inherently. And so even our positive actions, they call contaminated. So these, the light side are beings that are ascending. So these are the positive realms. They include humans, demigods, and gods. I think the first one is probably a human, the second one is a demigod, and the third one is a god. So they're sometimes called these devas. These beings, they're still in samsara, but they don't have any suffering. They've actually purified what causes the suffering in their minds to some extent, and not completely. It's still actually in the wheel of life. So they have an existence that is completely pleasurable, no suffering at all. But because they still haven't seeds of delusions, when their karma runs out to end their realms as devas and demigods, they will go to lower realms. Okay, because that the causes will veg the karmic causes to be in that very high state of pleasure. Said to be much more pleasurable than anything on the human realm. So the human realm is said to be the best to practice to get out of samsara, because we have a human body with human brain. We're not completely besotted by pleasure. We've got time to contemplate and to use the human body and brain to meditate, purify, and practice the path and proceed along the path. So that's the best place to be. So that's the lighter side. They're sort of realm that are relatively not suffering less. And then on the dark side, you've got animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings going down. The humans are going up, the lower realms are going down. So they've created negative karma, so they're experiencing the results of that. So then the middle ring, the 6 realms of existence. So that's the big ring is kind of. So that's the big ring is kind of. Sometimes they say there can be 5 or 6 in this, depending on which wheel of life you're looking at. So the upper half of the ring show happy transmigrations. So happy transmigrations are humans, gods, and demigods. I think that's probably everything from I think it's going from left to right. So I think the left sort of third is humans. The gods are the upper bit, the top third, and then the bit on the right, I think, are the demigods. The demigods they often fight with each other. They're in quite a comfortable position, but they're pervaded by jealousy. What was that?
I see in the top, in this one, you see arrows being shot down to there's little arrows flying.
Oh, this is on the demigod arrows?
Yeah, and this one here. Yeah.
So that.
No, the other one. The one on the top.
Oh, the one at the top.
Yeah.
So that's the demigods, or gods or demigods.
I'm just saying that you can see the arrows, they're shooting arrows down.
At the other one.
At the other one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's because they fight with each other. the so then the next one, the sixth one says, so the humans, gods and demigods, the lower half of the ring, the sectors show the unhappy migrations of hell beings, which is on the hell beings, I think, are the ones on the left, hungry ghosts at the bottom, and animals on the right. Yeah, so the animals are the ones after the demigods. So animals, this is sort of in terms of intense suffering, the animals the least, then the hungry ghosts, and then the hell realms are the most suffering. And then and I remember, I think I've said this before, but there was a question when I was at the Kopan course with Lameshi, and most of the people were very new to Dharma, and they asked, do these realms actually exist? Is there actually a physical, heaven and hell and hungry ghost realm and so on? And Lameshi just said that the hell realms are actually in this tent now, referring to everybody. So he was actually, if you think there's different ways you can interpret it, he wasn't saying that they're sort of up and down physically in these different places, but the seeds of the different realms are in our mind. Okay? And he was also probably referring to the fact that because we've had endless rebirths, we've done every realm. We've actually been in every top realm, the deeper, the most luxurious, and we've been in the hell realms. We've been in the animal realms, we've been in all the gods and demigods. We've experienced every single possible rebirth again and again, not just once. It's just, if you think of infinity, there's no beginning or end. So it was a very profound answer. Quite shocking. Most of us were completely shocked in the tent. So it's very different to the idea of heaven and hell in the Christian idea. It seems to sort of be up and down. Probably not that different in terms of experience. I guess there's more level. Anyway, but different in terms of causation and so on. So that's the middle ring, and then the outer ring with the 12 links, which we looked at pretty well last week, I think. So just maybe for people who just come. So the first one, we've got. So So the big sort of demon holding the ring is the Lord of Death. Okay, the Lord of Death. So we're actually because we're in cyclic resistance, that wheel of life is cyclic resistance, we're in the jaws of the Lord of Death. Okay, so they call him Yama. So he represents the impermanence that holds all sentient beings in its grip, all being subject to continual change. So they must undergo the suffering of gross impermanence, which is death. Okay, because we're in cyclic existence, as soon as we're born, whatever we're born as, we start moving towards death, because we're impermanence means that karma to be born is travelling towards the next step, which is death. Okay, so we mentioned that last week. The moment we're conceived in the womb, that's called birth, not the actual physical giving birth, conception in the womb. And from that moment, we're actually experiencing karma, the gradual karma of moving towards death, because of impermanence. So that's the jaws of death. And then up in the right-hand corner is Buddha Shakyamuni, his arm outstretched, and he's pointing to the moon. That's the moon on the left there, the full moon. The moon represents liberation or Nirvana, complete cessation of suffering. And pointing, Buddha's outstretched arm represents the path that leads to sensation. Okay? The Buddha compassionately and faultlessly has taught the path, and that's the fourth noble truth, the path out of the cyclic existence. And so that path has to be followed by sentient beings to attain liberation, Nirvana, the cessation of suffering. Okay. So for me, it's like, I think there's this comment I think is I've got from on page 2. One thing that this does, the benefits of meditating on 12 links, it's such a huge perspective. You know, we're looking at these different realms and so on. So it helps us to see cause and effect. But that's one of the things it does, how cause and effects work. But it's also meant to help us aspire to leave psychic resistance because it's so frightening. Okay? So generating renunciation, not wanting to be in this uncontrolled situation. So that's another purpose. And also, they say, His Holiness says, it helps us to see how tiny our little problems are, you know, little whatever they are, compared to problems that are existing in other realms. And even in this realm, you know, how things can be much worse in this realm, but how in some of those lower realms, things are just much, much worse. So this helps, it's like fear, but it also helps to develop faith and wanting to do something about the situation, and also compassion, because every unenlightened being who's not Buddha is actually, or not liberated, not in Nirvana, is experiencing this cycle, this cycle of existence. So we're not alone, we're all in this together, as I say. So that's compassion for other beings, compassion for other beings. Like equanimity, being in the same situation, and also compassion for particularly those beings who are in a more worse suffering state. It is frightening. They usually paint the temples, they paint them in very huge, like a whole wall of it, isn't it? Usually, if you go to a Tibetan temple, it's usually the whole wall as you come in the main temple door. The one we've got in the Gompa is pretty big too. We've got a very that big Tsangpa. When you're next in the main Gompa, have a look. It's up the back there. So now you'll be able to sort of look more closely. Any comments? Yeah. So certainly it does help. I think to. I mean, the truth of suffering, all those different sufferings, help develop the sense of renunciation when you realise the scope of it. But also the wheel of life actually puts it more in, puts the suffering in action, and you actually see how it works more. So it can very good for developing renunciation. Renunciation is the first principle of the path. But before we can sort of start work on our minds, our compassion, wisdom, you've got to have an incentive. You have to sort of want to do something. And so the more you actually, that's why, as they say, Buddha taught the first noble truth of suffering first, so that people can sort of get some sort of sense of urgency and see there is a problem. Okay, it's not that everything's just fine, but the positive side, problem has causes. Causes can be ended, and the path is the way. Now, this question, if the self doesn't have any sort of concrete self-existence, this person or the outside phenomena, what is it that resolves in psychic resistance? It's a great question, one that sort of came up when I went to Lamin courses, Kopan courses and so on. So how can something that doesn't have any intrinsic existence go through all this cause and effect? Okay? So this is a anyone think of that question? If you think about it, it's sort of saying, well, everything, this self is imputed. It's like just a label, but then the nominal self, who's this me, this Alan, can still experience all this, even if there's no intrinsic Alan. So this is what His Holiness says about that. the person who transmigrates from one life to the next is nothing more than a merely designated I. Often that's the way it's described, merely designated, merely, that means just something that's put on top of this collection of physical cells, the body, and what's happening in the mind. We put the word on top of that. One of the earlier modules we did, I think last year, was this example to help understand what merely designated means, is the idea of a newly born baby that hasn't been given a name. A newly born baby hasn't been given a name. There's just this collection of a crying body, but there's no name. So for that, when we first see it, we just see what we would call the aggregates, the collection of body and mind. But then as we give the name to that baby, Alan, for example, then we start to, more and more, we start to think that there's an Alan on top of what we see in the baby, whereas we didn't before. So we sort of solidify and materialize. That it's just a label. You can tell, because there wasn't an Alan there before. But as we sort of give the name, same with a pet, I suppose. That idea that there's actually something more than just the physical body. There's an Alan there. Okay. So he says, looking at his holiness there, bottom of this note, in fact, it would be impossible for rebirth to occur if there was an inherently existent self, because such a self would exist independent of all other factors. If it's inherently existent, it means it's not subject to cause and condition. So this could not be influenced by cause and condition and could not change. Okay? So if you think of the Christian idea of the soul, which is like immutable, that's always there, and so it couldn't change. It was not subject to cause and condition, it couldn't change. So that goes against the idea of impermanence in Buddhism, and idea that there isn't what seems to be an inherent existence, Alan, is actually just a whole series of changing mental states, and changing physical states. Every second the cells are changing, they're aging and so on. You can't see it, it's gradual. You can see it over years, over the physical aging of the body, and feel it too. I can certainly tell you feel it as you get older. So the mental continuum takes birth without a findable self. And here's a really good analogy. Just as a seal makes a clear impression on wax without transferring anything to the wax. Okay, so this collection of mind can have an effect on the next life. So this my mental continuum, karma and delusions on the mind stream, like the seal, can actually affect where I'm going to go in the future, what happens in the future. But it doesn't mean that there's something inherently there. The actual imprint of karma doesn't affect, doesn't pass, it doesn't transfer. The seal doesn't transfer to the collection of aggregates, body and mind. The seal comes away, but it's actually, if I know what a seal is, like the old way of signing legal document, you used to actually use wax, and you had like a stamp, and you put the stamp on the wax, and the wax goes on the paper, and then you put the stamp on it, and the mold sort of comes out on the paper like a rose, could be a different, whatever the shape is, and that's how. But when you take the stamp off, the seal off, there's nothing. The seal, without having there's nothing from the seal that's gone into the wax. Just forms the imprint. Okay. So karma, it's like that. It forms. It's like the stamp. It forms our mind without having anything sort of physically transferred. Right. I thought it was quite a good. If you don't think about it too much, it's actually I think it's a good analogy. For me, it was anyway. So for us, it appears, it appears that there is a real person. So when we're thinking, if you think, just be aware of what you're thinking when you're looking at the wheel of life. You're probably thinking that me is separate me is actually going possibly through all those different rebirths. Now, if you accept the idea of rebirth, me as an animal, me as a hungry person, me as a bird, and you're probably carrying the idea of the inherent existent me experiencing different things. So there's like a passive me, and it's experiencing animal experiencing me. So that's what His Holiness says. The aggregates and 12 things appear to be inherent existence to our minds that are polluted by ignorance. They are like a mirage that exists and functions. So when you know about the mirage, if you see in a road, you can actually sometimes on a hot day see water there. It looks exactly like water. So there's no water there. You can see as you come over the hill, but the water disappeared. But the cause and conditions, the heat, the road, all things, they all function to create the effect of water. So the water appears, it's a false appearance, but it appears to be there. Yeah. So just like this self-existent me or the external world appears to be there as concrete, so it functions, but it's actually a false appearance.
I mean, it's hard to go through life, thinking that we're you know what I mean? It's hard when you go through this day to day and everyone's relating to you as who you are, and you're to say, well, actually, no, I don't really exist in the way you think I exist. Julia Draper, I mean, I am, obviously, but meaning that I will be driven forward by everything, my karma, which is actually quite shocking, really. I find that really shocking, and was really shocked at one point when I discovered that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
That you're out of control.
Yeah, and you think of all the things that you do in your life, some good, some maybe not so good, and you don't mean it, like you're driven by all these things. You get angry, you get frustrated, you realise, oh no, like all of this is, is driving me forward.
So a lot of those things that are going to happen, like you might win the lottery tomorrow, or you might get a terrible disease tomorrow. The seeds are there from previous life, like if you look at the wheel of life, that could have happened, not last life, but many lives before. The cycle, that wheel is continually going and continually forming and continually coming to fruition. So,
if we look at time as 24-hour clock, you know what I mean? So how we view reality is completely different to how things truly are, you know what I mean?
But one meditation we do in a drop-in meditation on impermanence, we try and sort of think me now sitting on the cushion, and then we think back to, we can remember some experiences when we were, say, in childhood, 5, 10, 15 years old, and we're trying to sort of connect. There's definitely a connection because it's the same mind stream. But if you can remember some of the things you thought at that age, how immature you were, and how maybe you were frightened of certain things, it's definitely a different self in a way. There's connection, but the way you thought as a 10-year-old could be very different. It's not totally different.
No.
There's some habits, but there's some things that show that it's not the same. It's a different collection.
I've got a tape of me singing when I'm about 8 with my sister. She played it to me, doing karaoke, and we're talking and interacting, and I can't relate to that child. I can hear her, and I know it's me, but I can't in my head see that as is me. It's like me when I was 8, but not. I don't relate to how I am now.
Do you think you're trying to think it's the same person when we're being told that it's actually not the same?
Well, I mean, I can tell that I'm different from that child.
But there's something maybe hidden behind.
Yeah, I mean, you can think, I can hear me talk in a certain way. I think, that does remind me of my little quirks and things. But I don't. Yes, I'm trying to go back and remember, and I actually can't picture myself. Yeah, it's a different person. It's quite interesting.
But even that person and the current person is telling us, it's just
It's just
they're both not inherently existent.
they
All they
don't.
are is a mirage.
Yeah, it's a mirage.
Yeah. Collection. Like the water. It looks like it's a water, but it's actually just all these different things working together to create this illusion. So meditating on the 12 links, so it helps us to aspire us to leave psychic resistance. So time's rushing away. So just looking now at the fourth noble truth, the path to liberation. So Nirvana is not sort of some paradise up in the sky, but it's the end of uncontrolled rebirth, end of being in that cycle, the wheel of life. And so that's not the path, that's the goal, to be out of all suffering completely. And the path is the Dharma jewel. So the Dharma jewel is what helps it, leads us Dharma means to hold, so it holds us back from suffering, dukkha being suffering, Sanskrit word for suffering. So it holds us back from suffering, dukkha being suffering, Sanskrit word for suffering. So to realize that end of all suffering means that we have to, in our minds, realize the emptiness of the mind and clear all the obscurations. So the wisdom realizing emptiness of self and phenomena is what we need to, or what will create Nirvana. It is Nirvana. So, so this wisdom doesn't happen suddenly, but it will gradually work to the wisdom realizing emptiness. If we follow the path, not necessarily in this life. If we're lucky in this life, you can become enlightened in one life, like great things like Nirvana, but more likely over a period of lives. Depending on how good our practice is, it can be in one life, the very high beings that die just before they become enlightened, they're called once returners. Arhats meaning they're very close to full enlightenment, or they just have one more rebirth and then they become enlightened. And then there are other levels, I can't remember them off by heart, like stream enterers who maybe, I think, have 6 more lives to become enlightened and so on. But there's these different levels, gradually purifying and becoming closer and closer to enlightenment, so they can stay in the realization of emptiness without wavering. Not just when they do a meditation session, but they have realized their interest constantly. That's the Buddha mind.
Question.
Yeah.
Can you, once you've reached that point, can you go backwards? Like if you come back to reborn to help people?
So they say in our Mahayana Tibetan Buddhist system, the way to full enlightenment is the Bodhisattva path, because we're going to start bodhicitta next topic. So the Bodhisattva, we've developed bodhicitta, loving kindness, compassion for all being. I think there's 10 levels or 8 levels. I can't remember. Anyway, there's levels as they become more and more compassionate, more they use wisdom, and they also use compassion, wisdom and compassion, the two verts to enlightenment. So when they get to, I think it's the 3rd level of Bodhisattva, they call it a bhumi, the level. It's either the 3rd or 4th level, they can't go back. Okay. So I think it's the 4th level. You can check it out. It's probably in that book.
Did you say Bhumi level?
Bhumi level, yeah, Bhumi. The 4th level, I think it's anyway, a certain level of Bodhisattva attainment, so they become more and more able to express spontaneous bodhicitta. At a certain point, they can't go back, no return, non-returner. So, so what are the paths? So basically, His Holiness just sums up and says it's actually, in a nutshell, the three higher trainings: ethical conduct, ethics, concentration, and wisdom. Ethics, concentration, and wisdom. Ethics being how we avoid the 10 non-virtues, and how we cultivate the 10 virtues. 10 non-virtues. I think we sort of touched on this in another subject. So this is how we think and how we act with body, speech, and mind. Concentration is the ability to focus the mind on one thing. So if we develop that to the fullest extent, we reach shamatha, which being able to leave the mind on one thing without wavering. And that's a tool, it's not an end in itself. And when we can focus on one thing, if we make the object of our concentration wisdom realizing emptiness, how things exist, the emptiness of all existence, and leave the mind on that, that's the passport to enlightenment. But we need to practice ethics to be able to, you can't just sort of sit down and do a retreat on samatha without having merit, what they call merit. That means the mind has to be cultivated with ethics and merit. So you need to have made lots of offering, lots of rejoicing, confessions, purification. So these activities that cultivate and nurture the mind, and then that will allow us to be able to focus on develop shamatha, concentration. And then we can use our concentrated mind to focus on wisdom. So I've actually I won't go through it all, but His Holiness, I'm actually using a book called The Meaning of Life here, which is a nice little booklet where His Holiness sets out what he calls these three stages. Basically, and he talks particularly a lot about the beginning, ethical conduct, avoiding harm to ourselves. So that means, as much as possible, avoid harmful actions that are going to come back on, cause us to suffer, and as much as possible, cultivate the 10 positive actions. So we avoid killing, lying, sexual misconduct, harsh speech, gossip. These are the 10 non-virtues. And as much as possible, practice the opposite: patience, non-violence, etc. And then he actually talks quite a bit about some of the difficult, this is, if we had more time we could go into this, but how sometimes it's very difficult to see what the best thing to do is. Like it's good, it's fine to say, oh, killing's bad and lying's bad and so on, but then there are these grey areas, which His Holiness actually looks at quite deeply, such as things like genetic engineering, scientific progress like developing atomic energy and so on, and what are the things that can increase the power of what we do: frequency, regret, rejoicing, strength, motivation, and so on. So if it's a positive action, the more we do it, the stronger it gets. Think about developing compassion, loving kindness, the habit of being patient. If it's a negative action, the more we get angry, the more it becomes a habit, and the harder it is to do. So all these factors can actually increase the intensity of our actions. But so Lama Zopa says, basically, if you want to simplify, this is from the readings there on page 36, this is the readings that went with the module. an attitude. The attitude is basically going to be very much the influence of the effect of your action. So the thought of bodhicitta, loving kindness, having an altruistic motivation, can turn the actions into a positive action. He says, live with, get up, walk with bodhicitta, wake, sleep with bodhicitta, eat with bodhicitta, work with bodhicitta. So the more we can pervade our mind with compassion, loving kindness, then the more the results of our action will have positive results. And that positive result will be the course for enlightenment. So the ethics, concentration and wisdom, they're usually the basis for the Theravadan idea of Nirvana, where there's the end of all suffering. So ethics, concentration, wisdom would be the path in the Pali tradition. But if in the Buddhist tradition, they make it slightly different. It covers the same thing, but it adds compassion, renunciation, bodhicitta, shunyata, the three principles of the path. So the three higher trainings for leading personal liberation. And personal liberation is the middle scope being who wants to end all suffering permanently, escape the wheel of life. The highest scope being adds compassion to that. He wants to escape suffering. The wheel liberate to escape suffering. The wheel liberate wants to escape rebirth, like existence, so that he can help other beings do the same. So that's the extra ingredient of bodhicitta, which is really distinguishes the Mahayana frequency of the path approach from the Theravada, to simplify. But the basis of renunciation in the Mahayana is still, it covers those three things like ethics, concentration, wisdom. You have to have those. Okay. So the Mahayana approach is that just being liberated, you've ended all suffering, but they say that that's not the last stage. The ultimate stage of Buddhahood is reached when you add compassion to the path, and then you actually become a fully enlightened Buddha. So the liberated being, Arhat being, has reached that by focusing on his own liberation from suffering, whereas the Buddha being has focused on his liberation to help other beings become liberated for the sake of authentic being. That's the difference. And both of them are valid. Both of them are Dharma practice. We don't say that the Theravada is wrong. I remember when I went to Sri Lanka and my sort of journey to find the meaning of life in the 80s. I'd just done the Copan course. I'd sort of been drenched with Mahayana. And Sri Lanka is Hinayana, of course, Theravada. And I did a really good shamatha mindfulness retreat for 10 days, one of their beautiful hermitages. But one thing that I couldn't overlook was that they did just say that the Mahayana was wrong. Because the Pali canon, they only recognise the written records in part of the Pali language. His Holiness describes why the Mahayana is valid. He says the Theravada teachings are valid, but actually the other scriptures are also valid. They're not in Pali, but some of the teachings are in Sanskrit, and that includes the Mahayana teaching. But in Sri Lanka they say, oh no, if it's not in the Pali canon, there's no bodhicitta mentioned in the Pali canon. There's no bodhicitta mentioned in the Pali canon. So Mahayana is completely wrong. So Mahayana is completely wrong. So I was a bit shocked. Anyway. But it was good to hear both, because one thing that the Mahayana don't one of the things that is completely negative karma is to criticize the Theravada teaching.
Because I go to a Zen circle, 20%. I go to Zen, you're constantly trading.
Well, Zen is Mahayana.
Yeah, it is, but they, at a very deep, any mention of like anything in bodhicitta, even though it's part of it, it's like, I'll drop it.
Oh, really?
You're going to concentrate on something else.
Yeah, and like for example, in Shinya, like Shunyata is like the core, concentrate. I think they're trying to focus on concentration.
They're focusing on discipline and meditation and simplicity.
Yeah, and so and sometimes I was
just for people on stream. The question is about Zen meditation, how they also can say that that's the only way.
But yeah, no, it was a bit shocked because I actually started just to go to this one says like, oh, don't worry too much about it or whatever. And also the motivation to be bodhisattva as well. That says I'll drop that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because it's you're constantly you're not focusing on meditation.
So was this a fully qualified monk who was saying this?
Is it a sense that yeah.
I stand it right.
But it was it says like it's part of Mahayana.
Yeah.
But when your purpose is obsidian.
Yeah. They'd probably say you become compassionate by just doing the focus, doing the.
What they do is they don't have metta and anapanasati.
No.
But it's more like mixed together.
Right.
So you're actually doing anapanasati with the warmth in order to unlock that Buddhahood.
Okay.
But
which involves compassion.
But they're always but
technique.
Yeah, and like I think it's for me personally it works because I'm always like, this is weird. I used to walk around, I was a former law student. I used to walk around thinking I was like going south for justice or something. It was just a cringe thing I did when and I used to go to all these protests and whatnot, and then I realized after a while it wasn't just like, God of justice. I used to think I was like I was managing street.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So it basically then worked in a way that it trolled my own brain.
Yeah. Because they strip you of your ego in a way too. And I remember I only went to one Zen meditation when I was in Bodh Gaya, and beautiful temple, and very strict posture, and like they emphasize master walking around whacking people with a stick when I thought I was completely perfectly straight, but I got the very big whack, but then you thank them when you get whacked, you thank them for that, and it suddenly woke me up that I didn't quite know what I did wrong. I actually thought, oh, I really like cocaine better. It was much better.
Sometimes they'll pretend they're going to whack you, but you don't get whacked, and then you'll be because I did like psychology, it's mentioned how you live in a paradox.
Right.
So you would think, oh, we get whacked, and then you would prepare for it, and then after the whole hour is done, you don't get whacked the whole time.
Yeah.
It's a bit shocked.
I actually wasn't prepared for it. That was a tough problem. But it's good. And then I did a Zen. There's probably there was no Mahayana center in Sydney in the 80s when I was interested. But we did some terrific meditation. You face the wall, don't you?
Yeah.
Face the wall.
Your eyes for a little break.
What is a good opportunity to practice patience when you hear someone saying that your studying is rubbish and
oh, look, it's really great. His Holiness says, the more you can practice patience when someone criticizes your religion, then the better practitioner you are. You should be able to not get angry with that.
Yeah.
Because you've got the conviction that this is the correct one. No one should be able to just rattle you and say it's a lot of rubbish. It's like this wonderful story of the monk that's been practicing patience, and he's sort of spent many months, and then he came out and told one of his other monks, I've just spent 3 months practicing patience, it's so much better. And the monk said, patience? what a lot of shit. You're full of bullshit. And so the monk who's been practicing patience just went into a rage. So he's obviously, the other monk was trying to just see whether he made any progress. Anyway.
Sounds like a good plan.
So because we've only got about 10 minutes, I think it'd be good to just do this meditation on Wheel of Life, because it doesn't take more than about 10 minutes. But if you can just maybe, if you've got the picture of Wheel of Life, have it in front of you. Oh my God. Okay, so get comfortable sitting. Few minutes just to focus on the breath, calm down. Before we start our meditation on the Wheel of Life, just setting our motivation, bodhicitta motivation. The purpose of our life is to lead sentient beings from suffering into enlightenment. To do this, we need to become enlightened ourselves. And to become enlightened, we need to follow the path, the Great path to enlightenment. Part of that path is to understand cyclic existence. The more we understand, the more we want to leave cyclic existence. The more we want to leave cyclic existence. So therefore we're going to meditate on the Wheel of Life. So therefore we're going to meditate on the Wheel of Life. So we can understand the process of rebirth in cyclic existence. Afflictions. These are represented by the rooster, the snake, and the pig. Root afflictions are desire, hatred, and ignorance. The rooster and the snake are shown emerging from the mouth of the pig. The afflictions of desire and hatred arise from ignorance. The pig representing ignorance, the snake and the pig representing hatred and desire. This fundamental ignorance is represented by the pig that holds, and it is the misconception that holds tightly the mistaken idea of how things exist. Believing all phenomena exist from their own side, sentient beings go on to develop attachment towards objects, desire and anger towards objects of aversion, and all the other afflictions and deluded states of mind follow. So then think, the centre of my problems and dissatisfaction are the delusions of desire, hatred and ignorance. Of these three, the main cause is ignorance, mistaking things, and mistaking myself to have intrinsic existence. If I'm ever going to be free of cyclic existence, suffering, I must uproot this fundamental ignorance and the afflictions that have built upon it. Contemplate this. Next, the inner ring represents contaminated actions. This first ring surrounding the hub of the wheel has two halves. The left has light background and the right shaded dark. The two semicircles represent two major types of contaminated actions that can be created, positive and negative. The light side of the ring are three beings, ascending. The light side of the ring are three beings, ascending, because they've accumulated positive karma that will lead to the three highest states of existence: gods, demigods, and humans. The dark side of the ring, there are three beings, or who are descending, since they've collected negative karma that will lead to the three lower realms: animals, hungry ghosts, and hell. Think, through the force of my root afflictions, I've engaged in contaminated actions, some of which are negative, and have the potential for rebirth within unfavourable states of existence. Others are positive, having potential to produce a favourable. I must certainly abandon and purify the negative action, producing suffering and existence. But with all contaminated actions, both negative and positive, they serve to produce continued rebirth and cycle of existence. In the end, I must discard and abandon all contaminated actions. And the root afflictions that are behind it, contemplate. So then, all these sectors represent levels of suffering in terms of the types of birth within Samsara. Think. Through the force of my contaminated actions, I produce countless rebirths throughout various realms of cyclic existence, each with their own level of suffering. Rebirths in the animal, hungry, ghost, and hell realms are clearly unsatisfactory, but none of these resultant states of rebirth, even in the higher states of gods, are truly satisfactory. These pleasures are experienced there are deficient and transitory. Therefore, I must seek to break free from the suffering of continual rebirth in samsara and abandon contaminated actions and afflictions that perpetuate my stay within a wheel of existence. Contemplate that. Then the outer ring, the 12 links of dependent origination. First link of ignorance, represented by a blind person, followed by the second link of compositional action, pictured by the potter, and then the third link of consciousness, symbolized by the monkey swinging from a branch. Fourth link, name and form, depicted by two people carried in a boat. The fifth link, the six sense spheres, shown as an empty house. The sixth link, contact, illustrated by a woman and a man embracing. Seventh link, feeling, a man with an arrow piercing his eye. The eighth and ninth links of craving and grasping are depicted as a person drinking alcohol and a monkey snatching fruit. The 10th link of existence is represented by a pregnant woman. 11th link birth, shown by a woman giving birth. The last one, 12th link, aging and death, illustrated by a person carrying a corpse. Understanding the interdependence of these causes, I must then develop the wish to definitely emerge from this process and to attain Nirvana, state of complete liberation. Contemplate this. Grasping the wheel of life is the monstrous yarn of the Lord of Death. Grasping the wheel of life is the monstrous yarn of the Lord of Death, represents the permanence that holds all sentient beings in its grip. All beings are subject to gross impermanence of death. No matter what realm beings take, sooner or later that life must come to an end. Buddha Shakyamuni, in the right-hand corner, with his right arm outstretched, points to the bright full moon in the upper left-hand corner. The moon represents liberation from Nirvana, complete cessation of suffering. While pointing, the Buddha's outstretched arm represents the path that leads to that cessation. The methods that the Buddha compassionately and faultlessly taught, and that sentient beings must follow to attain that state. Think. Remaining within the wheel of existence, I'll only be subject to the demon of death and repeated birth, rebirth. If I embrace the path the Buddha has taught, this will definitely lead me to the bliss of liberation, completely free from rebirth and suffering. Then we can dedicate, about having done this meditation, wheel of life, now quickly generate renunciation, the wish to definitely emerge from the pattern of continual rebirth within cyclic systems. Now quickly develop the wisdom that eradicates fundamental ignorance as the root of samsara. Through my compassionate wish to benefit others, become a Buddha for the sole purpose of leading all sentient beings into that enlightenment. Dedicating to that. Okay, so thanks so much for being there, both in the room and out there in streaming land. I'll just end the stream and hope to see you next week for the next module, which is bodhicitta, compassion. Goodbye.